It's not often enough that we take a few moments to celebrate and appreciate the innovators, the visionaries, the risk takers that have helped shape this great game into what we know it to be today. There are family legacies involved in these stories, and today we're telling one of them as we take you up close and personal into the story of Ely Callaway as told by his son, Nicholas. You don't want to miss this really cool conversation straight ahead. For several years, I have been connected with and really good friends with Brian Minbiole, who recently retired after a 3+ decade run at Callaway. But I believe the saying, Brian, is you can take the boy out of Callaway, but you can't never take Callaway out the boy, right?
That is the truth.
So it's good to see you, my friend. And why don't you kind of set the scene for what brings us together as I kind of gave a little legacy teaser for this conversation?
Well, it was in Mr. Callaway's last number of years that it was rumored that he was writing a book. And I know that several people were brought along to not only put it into play, but I think encourage the man to take his eye just temporarily off the golf business and really talk about his life. And I was all excited in 1999 when it was teased that the book was really going to be completed and I might be able to sell it as a Callaway salesperson on the road. When that didn't take place, and I was very disheartened because I think it's an incredible story to tell. It wasn't until last November when I saw a sneak peek in one of the golf magazines with a segment of what was a forthcoming book in March. And I read the story and it was legit. It was real. It was authentic because it spoke to some of the behaviors that I, in fact, took part in. And as things rolled along, as I became more aware of what was going on with this book, I was all the more enchanted and excited to know that Ely's youngest son, Nicholas, was involved in this, which again reinforced my belief that it was going to be authentic, but that it was actually going to come to life. And through a little bit of moving around, I had the opportunity to meet our third guest today. And I can tell you he's a chip off the old block, and he has rekindled my already high enthusiasm for his father and the brand in general. And this is, as I've said, this is the pot of gold at the end of my sales rainbow to once again be affiliated.
Well, Nicholas Callaway, it's great to have you with us. And as Brian describes you as a chip off the old block, I would love to begin our conversation by having you paint the picture for the block. You know, what what do you think of when you think of dad? And let's maybe start that with some thoughts outside of golf. Just what was it like growing up with the guy that so many consider to be a pioneer in the game?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Bill. And thank you for that beautiful introduction, Brian. One of the greatest pleasures of this project has been to meet for the first time or to meet again some of the Callaway Golf OG, the people like you, Brian, who were at the core, going back to the early days of Callaway Golf and who were lived and were part of the extraordinary success of Callaway Golf. And everyone I've met has the same reaction, which is they loved Ely, and that many say he was the most inspirational force in their lives, and not just as an employer, and that dedication and love and admiration for him is still here, 24 years after he passed away. And we're actually gathering people like you, Brian, and you, Bill, who've said to me, tell us what we can do. We want to honor Ely. We will do anything to tell his story again. And that's why I did the book, because being his son, I participated in and I observed this extraordinary man and life story. And toward the end of his life, I convinced him that he should write it, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise that it wasn't finished during his lifetime because for a couple of reasons. One thing that I knew about him was that he had uncanny vision. He had that rare ability to see around corners, to see ahead. And so many of the things that he pioneered, the things that preoccupied him, his causes, what he cared about, are as important and relative to today, and I mean literally this week, as they were when he was alive. And therefore, he's coming back, and he has so much to teach us that is valuable today. That is, to me, part of the magic of this project. And it's word of mouth, combined with social media and digital marketing and influencers, is still so powerful. And all of us who live and love the game, golf is not just a sport. It's not just a leisure activity. It's a lifestyle. It's a culture. And you spoke beautifully about tradition and legacy as a personal passion of yours. That is so deeply at the core of the game of golf, don't you think?
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
and so you asked my own experience of Ely. Well, among the many discoveries in the book, and everyone will discover things that they didn't know about Ely in this book, because we tell stories that he left behind like a trail of breadcrumbs for me that he was never able to tell in his lifetime. And so it would not have been the same book. And in fact, there are things that I discovered that readers will discover that will will complete the picture of his life. And I think even increase that admiration for him, because he was severely tested in different key moments in his life, and how he reacted and responded to it not only uh, defines who he was, but we now will understand why he moved to California in midlife after an entire career in textiles, and gave it all up and reinvented himself as a pioneer of late 20th century California entrepreneurial culture and creator of lifestyle brands. At the same time, first it was in wine, and then, of course, in golf, but it was at the same time up north. He went south where no one was growing grapes, and created one of the finest California premium varietal wines. But everyone else was in Napa, and we were in the middle of the Napa and Northern California wine and food revolution. Hollywood was in the middle of the new directors, new American cinema revolution. Silicon Valley with the technology revolution. So he was liberated by the crisis that he faced, that he tells in his own words in chapter 4. It's called the Madison Matter, and it will be, I believe, both revelatory and inspirational
Yeah.
to
Let me
all.
let me jump in just for a moment, Nicholas. The book, by the way, is called The Unconquerable Game: My Life in Golf and Business by Ely Callaway. And for every child, every young boy, every young girl, there are these years early on where you don't pay attention to anything. You don't know what's happening. You know, dad leaves the house every day and comes back generally every day for the most part, and perhaps mom does the same thing. But having an awareness of what this thing called a career is, and certainly it takes forever to view your parent as a pioneer in anything because they're just mom or dad. And do you do you have a recollection of when it kind of clicked in for you that, I think dad might be kind of a big deal in this
Yeah.
golf world, as opposed to, hey, dad's heading out to work again, but where it really started to register in your brain that, oh, I think he might be kind of good at this, and I didn't know that until now.
It's a it's a it's a very meaningful story because what most people also don't realize is that Callaway Golf was his third career that he started in a garage with these two other gentlemen, a Callaway hickory stick. He was 63 in 1982. But what people don't realize, even during his lifetime, because he underplayed it, is that he had been deeply involved as an amateur playing the game of golf, studying it. Bobby Jones was his hero and his cousin. So, in other words, by the time he started this little tiny, as you call it, little itty bitty golf company in Temecula, California, he had been deeply involved in the game of golf for 60 years.
Wow.
So it's meaningful because he wasn't just a business guy starting a golf club company. Golf was the greatest passion and meaning and activity his entire life. And you get a great sense of it in reading this book. And that I think will be inspirational to all business people, all entrepreneurs, and of course, all golfers. So that's another way of saying that that was my first
Yeah.
experience of Ely as dad was as um, a a, an excellent amateur golfer.
Hmm.
Before for I was almost 35 before he went into the golf business, but I had a whole lifetime playing with him. I learned to walk, on the fairway at Weburn Country Club, in the mid 1950s with holding my father and my mother's hands. They were the mixed couples champions at Weburn, in 1957. So golf is my first experience and image and knowledge of him.
Yeah, it makes sense. Brian, you and I have talked over the years about your favorite interactions with Mr. Callaway, and you have always spoken, whether there's a microphone near you or not, you have always spoken of him in very reverential terms. Um, New employee comes in, you get to meet the boss. The boss is the boss, right? It's whether you're making widgets or selling golf clubs, there's a boss out there. And at some point, you either choose to learn more about what makes that boss tick, or you just decide, I'm cash a paycheck and this will be a job and I'll be here for a little while. Well, 30 plus years later, Callaway is forever enmeshed in part of your story. So can you kind of take us back to some early memories when you met Ely and thought, oh, this guy does things differently. This isn't the same old sales job that I could pick up next door.
Well, it was interesting as I went through a local interview process to, be weeded out and potentially selected to go out to Callaway headquarters. Um, I was instructed that there would be 3 different levels of interviews. And I would meet with the inside sales manager, and then I would meet with Mr. Callaway's chosen chief merchant, Bruce Parker. And then I would have to sit in front of Nicholas Callaway's father for the last part of the gauntlet. Um, the gentleman who was encouraging me and had selected me to go through this process let me know that 2 different salespeople for other territories had gone through this same exact process and had made it in front of Mr. Callaway and had answered his questions incorrectly. So I was schooled on what Mr. Callaway was going to ask me. And 2 out of the 4 questions that he asked me, I was aware of and had in my mind practiced a little bit to make sure I could adorn those. But I'll tell you, when I was in the room with him, and I think Nicholas will concur, when Mr. Callaway matched eyes with you, you were the only person in the room. It didn't matter if you were in a crowd. If he was addressing you or you were addressing him, he blocked out everything. And that put me in a position to say, if this man generally does care what I have to say, he's showing it. And if he doesn't, he's an incredible liar, because this man is making me feel like I'm the most important person in the world right now. And I'm about ready to join a company that did 21 million in sales, and I'm going to go to a territory that did a whopping $200,000 before I arrived. And based on what I was told, I was going to take a $25,000 pay cut to work for this man. And he asked me a couple of challenging questions. He asked me what I felt about the USGA, which is kind of a challenging question that I was not prepared by my superiors to answer. And knowing that from my research that Mr. Callaway and Bobby Jones were very close and the importance of amateur golf and all that, I decided that I was going to be true to the man that I was prepared for, and that was to be authentic. And I challenged the USGA and said, I don't believe that they're always in favor of the amateur golfer. And I think they've got a very distinct view that they are governing the game for. And I don't always believe that that's the best governing body for the world of golf. And then I held my breath and prepared to be shown the door. And Mr. Callaway reinforced that he shared that opinion, that they weren't always great for golf, and that he wanted to get rid of the 14 club rule. And at some point in time, they were going to limit the enjoyment of the average player while they strove to protect the game from the highest level player. And after I breathed a sigh of relief and answered his next 2 questions that I was prepared for, he asked me the last one. He said, Brian, do you like ice cream? I said, Mr. Cal, I most certainly do. He goes, well, it's time for soft serve. We went into the Bentley and got ice cream, and I just assumed that I was hired.
Wow.
What a great story, Brian.
Yeah, and Nicholas, as Brian tells that story, I'm wondering if the angst with the USGA was a theme that kind of weaves itself throughout decades of innovation, right? Because every time you try to push the limits a little bit, you've got to push back against the limits being set by the USGA. What do you remember in your conversations with your father about some of those frustrations as he tried to bring the game to everybody and had that perception that the governing bodies didn't really share the same vision?
Well, Ely was one of the original disruptors. It's an overused phrase, but he was a pioneer of disruption throughout his life. But he did it with a purpose, not to tear things down, but to create something. His famous phrase was that he was devoted to creating products that were demonstrably superior and pleasingly different. Those 4 words say it all. And he also believed that any product could be improved. So it was innovation with a purpose, and it was disruption with a purpose to create a better product and a better and more pleasing experience for the user. And he had a relentless dedication to that. So he loved the he loved the being the innovator and disruptor because he had vision and he knew his customer and he always thought about customer first and what do they want, whether it's in creating the product or servicing them. Those are the building blocks, some of the building blocks of a great brand. And by the way, in the book, he literally gives you a manual, his manual of how to create a brand. And these are some of the ingredients of the recipe.
It's to me, it's always fascinating to look back years prior and realize that a legend was being formed because while it's happening, the legend doesn't sit around going, I think I'm going to be, no, there's there's nobody in the Bible who was going through their travails thinking, someday I think I'm going to be in the book of Ruth. It doesn't work that way. And so as we're seeing all this unfold, and I read some of the testimonials that are part of the book, the unconquerable game. You see praise from Gary Player and from Annika, from
Mm.
Jack, and from a competitor, from Wally Uline, and
Follow you line.
see all these different folks that recognize that in many ways they would not be where they are or where they were without the contributions of a pioneer like Ely Callaway. I think probably Brian would say the same thing, right? It's all part of this tapestry that weaves its way through so many other lives. But at the time, was your dad, I don't know, was he aware of his role in all this, or was he just kind of plodding forward with a particular idea in front of him? And once he checked that off the list, he'd go on to the next one.
He lived for innovation. And so one of the things you learn in the book is that like Callaway Golf was the grand performance, but those elements that made that company unique, he had been applying the learnings and the tools all his life. And so it came naturally to him. This is what he lived for. And of course, you're always trying to improve. You're trying to improve as a human being. You're trying to improve in the way you treat people, and you're trying to improve what you make. So I don't. He he never looked back. It was always it was this extraordinary energy and forward momentum to make things better, to
Yeah.
treat people better, to improve a company's culture. And that's what we hear from people. Brian, you speak, I think, more eloquently than anyone I've met, actually, about about Ely and this magic. So thank you.
Well, it's fascinating to me as I was there as this monstrosity was being built, and I don't know that we necessarily fully realized where it was going and how it was going to fundamentally change the entire industry and have all of our competitors who basically looked at a wedge and putter company as truly coming up from behind. It's the objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. And I clearly remember, Bill, being at the 93 sales meeting at Pebble Beach when the Big Bertha drivers and fairways were doing exceptionally well. We could not make enough. We were on allocation. There was a salesperson in me telling somebody they couldn't get as many as they wanted. And that is kind of the antithesis of what this whole deal is supposed to be about. And we're enjoying Pebble Beach. And throughout this meeting, I am being shown what is going to become the Big Bertha Warbird. And I'm showing what is going to become the Big Bertha Iron. And I'm thinking, why is this having to move so fast? We're not even caught up on the last one. And Mr. Callaway was, we are going to improve on our existing products before our competitors have a chance to catch up to the previous ones. And this constant desire to innovate, and I believe one of the greatest talents Mr. Callaway had is his ability to get the most out of the people who worked around him. He was not looking for credit or adulation. He knew that if everybody else did their job, the end result is he was going to do pretty darn well. And he freed people and gave everybody an opportunity to reach their maximum potential, be it designers, be it marketers, be it salespeople. And we were all given this ideal that he was always progressing forward. He was working hard to make a better product, service your customers better. And the minute, I get to the 1994 PGA show and I've got customers expecting to add to the same Big Bertha orders they had placed before. And I'm like, that's old news, guys. There's a whole new wood family, and there's an iron that's going to fundamentally change the game. And all of a sudden, jaws hit the floor, and I knew every other booth around me in the PGA show was caught completely blindsided. And that wry little smile from Nicholas's father was there as he sat in the booth on his director's chair, knowing, yeah, I've lapped him once again.
And I think that quality is going to happen all over. It's fascinating to hear you talk about, the demand versus the supply for the Big Bertha. Um, we're we're already sold out of the first printing of the. I don't think I've even shown, but of the book. We're going to have multiple printings prior to publication, and these inspirational messages and the Ely magic is coming back. So just like the Big Bertha, this is going to be a sensation. And we're going to watch that happen all over again. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, part of the legend, I think, is magnified and amplified by that friendship with Mr. Palmer, right? So there came a time when these legends collided, and it would appear as if they hit it off pretty nicely. One could always conjecture how different both trajectories might have been had they not gotten along, had they been oil and water, had they not been able to see the vision together. I would love to hear from both of you because, Brian, I know you had some encounters with Mr. Palmer and Mr. Callaway, and Nicholas obviously as well. I'd love to hear from both of you how you think that relationship became a part of what today is a company that's still thriving and near the top of the industry. But at one point, it was kind of up to question whether that was going to happen. And then along came the king, right?
Well, again, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Go right ahead, Nicholas.
Well, Brian, you can tell the story of how their relationship culminated, but I can give you a little taste from the book of what I learned of, again, how deep and long-standing were the roots of these relationships. Ely played in what was then called the Crosby Clambake, now the AT&T Pro-Am at Pebble Beach, in a foursome in 1967 with Arnold Palmer and Mark McCormick, the founder of IMG. And he knew Mark McCormick going back to the 1950s before he started IMG. They were excellent amateur golfers. And so these two giants who really changed their industries, entertainment, sports management, and golf, knew each other and played golf with each other. And so what they did grew out of their love of the game. Well, how did Mark McCormick start IMG? It was with Arnold Palmer. And that began sports management. And just think about what that is today. And then, of course, it went from Arnold Palmer to the big three, to Gary Player and Jack Nicklaus. So Ely was still he was in the textile business in the 1960s, but he and Mark continued to play golf together. Mark was pitching him at Burlington ideas for some of his athletes and entertainers. You, Ely tells for the first time that the idea to move to California and all that then happened from it, and he moved, oh, 5 years later, but it was that weekend playing with Arnold Palmer and Mark McCormick that he had the idea that he might move to California one day and plant a vineyard. That's the origin moment of it all. And in some of our bonus content, we have that was on ABC Wide World of Sports, that the Crosby every year. We have great video of Ely playing with Arnie in the in the Crosby clam bake. So that's the origin. But look what it grew into.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing
When
to see.
yeah, it's amazing. These are shows how long and deep the roots are and how big the forest is that has grown from those roots. So that's the fun of the book. Is really learning those origin stories. And of course, one of the last people he talks about meeting when he was on his deathbed is Mark McCormick. Well, first of all, he when Tiger comes on the scene, Ely and Callaway Golf bid on, on sponsorship. So remember, we're talking about having known Mark McCormick, who invented partnership, and having watched that for 30 years. Then he finds himself across the bargaining table trying to get Tiger with his old friend Mark McCormick.
Hmm.
And the book ends, little spoiler alert, the book ends with Ely on his deathbed with his last great idea, which is he writes a letter to the big three who he had known, for 40 years, and he wanted to bring them back together and go into an entire new business at Callaway Golf with the big three. And the letter the letter itself, we reproduce on the last page of the book.
Wow. Brian, your memories of Mr. Palmer.
As you and I have discussed, my dad respected Jack Nicklaus, but he loved Arnold Palmer. And, so I was taught to revere Jack and to adore Arnie. And as Arnold Palmer was being invited to be part of the company, initially it was to be a spokesperson for the golf ball. And I think that was not only a great individual to give us credibility, but it was also one of Mr. Callaway's great needles, as the USGA was not a fan of the name of the golf ball, because there's only 34 rules of golf, Bill, but the 35th rule, according to Mr. Callaway, is to enjoy the game. So as Mr. Palmer is touting this new golf ball, he is in fact putting himself in the crosshairs of the USGA. It's also at that point when we are very much committed to challenging the coefficient of restitution, or how fast a ball can leave a driver face. Mr. Callaway had successfully fought the USGA as they were trying to not allow the biggest Big Bertha in 1997 to come to reality, and he was able to get them to move a little bit. So now where the biggest Big Bertha in 97 was now the standard. So who better to explain Mr. Callaway's ideals and philosophy, that there is tournament golf and there is pleasurable golf. There's what Bill and I enjoy, and then there's what we watch on the weekend. And who better to describe these two different areas of golf than Arnold Palmer, who could have fun and could also play in a tournament. And what an incredible spokesperson to give tournament and USGA credibility to Mr. Callaway's idea and have Mr. Palmer believe that this is what the USGA should embrace and how the world of golf should continue. And I've got such an appreciation for Mr. Palmer going out and crossing the line a little bit as a guy who was a spokesperson for the USGA and was looked at from that organization as an ally, but realizing that can I bring these two divergent thoughts together with the singular goal that Mr. Callaway had is to make the game more enjoyable for every player. So if you're playing on tour, hit our conforming version. If you're going to just play for grins and giggles, hit the non-conforming version, and there's a good chance, you might hit a couple more memorable drives. I remember Mr. Callaway in the booth debating with somebody who looked like they were from the USGA, and I can only make this broad assumption because there was a bow tie and a sport coat on, that he said, how many of the people who have a registered handicap know the difference between a white stake, a red stake, and a yellow stake? And there was a fumbled response, and he said, my point exactly. And he said, how many people hit a breakfast ball if their first tee shot is not what they like? Okay. How many putts have been raked in inside 3 feet? Okay, where are you going with this? You're going to tell me that I have players who can't post a handicap if they use a driver that might occasionally hit the ball a little farther, yet all these things that are absolutely encompassed in your 34 rules of golf can be easily looked past. And like virtually every other debate I saw Mr. Callaway have with anyone, and I mean anyone, he was more compelling, he was more passionate, and made more sense. And this individual in the bow tie was left speechless, which again added that little twinkle to Mr. Callaway's eye because he knew he had got someone else to realize where he was coming from.
And that's a wonderful story, Brian. Thank you. And there's an example of every word that you recited that he said, you knew that that was coming out of a lifetime of playing golf and understanding the average golfer's experience and what would enhance it and make it more pleasurable. In fact, I always remember growing up and playing with him, and he never got angry. He never got frustrated. It was pure pleasure for him, and he never kept score. And if I would hit a bad shot or he would hit a bad shot, he'd say, "Oops." He said, "Oh, that doesn't matter." He had a pocket full of balls, and he dropped the next one. He said, "Let's try that again." And he said, "It doesn't matter the score. Just hit till you're happy." That's it. That's what I call Ely golf.
Absolutely.
Nicholas, do you have connection and involvement currently in the company, or is
No.
this all
No.
legacy?
No, I don't have, I'm not I have no role in the company. My company, Callaway Arts and Entertainment, is a media and publishing company. We are publishing the book independently. I'm an observer of Callaway Golf, of course, and they're very supportive of the book as the origin story of the founder and the brand, but I have no stake in the company.
I would assume when you go out to play, though, we might recognize the clubs in your bag.
Yes, that is a vestige. That is part of the legacy.
I would hope.
It would. I really can't be seen playing anything else. And I don't want to because I really I so enjoy. I still play with my original Heavenwood, the seven, which is like the hybrid before hybrids. It's still a great club, but I do they're very kind to me, since I'm one of the few with family members, Callaway family members, and so they're very kind to me, and I do play with the clubs with great pleasure.
Well, it would be no challenge at all to spend the next 3 or 4 hours, just telling more stories and digging into the book even further. But we also want people to buy the book. So it's called The Unconquerable Game, My Life in Golf and Business. It's the story of a legend, Ely Callaway, and Nicholas is a big part of that. Brian Minbiole also, and really appreciate the two of you coming together to just kind of give us a little taste, a little teaser of what we can learn when we dig into this book. So thank you
Well,
so much, gentlemen.